Peace and happiness are the nature of our being, and we share our being with everyone and everything. If you want to find peace and happiness, lasting peace and happiness, you must look for it where it resides, namely in your own being. Everybody who is watching this interview is doing so precisely because the world has failed to provide them with the happiness that it seemed to promise. We can be forgiven for thinking that happiness is derived from objective experience.
What exactly happens when we wake up from the stream?
The waking state arises within awareness, and then awareness loses itself in that state. Like an actor plays the part of a character, he gives himself so fully to the part that he loses himself in it and seems to become the character. The space in this room, which seems to be a temporary, finite, limited space, is the same space as the vast, unlimited space of the universe. If the space in this room were to give itself a name, it would call itself I. The space of the universe were to give itself a name, it would call itself I. That's the same I. The knowledge I am is even higher than the knowledge God is. And this recognition of the nature of our being puts an end to that existential longing and the fear of death. What element of my experience cannot be removed from me? Let's do it now.
It would mean a lot to us if you could hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much and enjoy the podcast.
Rupert, it's truly an honor to have you here on the show on Under the Tree. Your teachings on non-duality and the nature of awareness have profoundly impacted so many seekers on their spiritual journey. I truly look forward to diving deep into your wisdom, exploring the nature of consciousness, and uncovering the deeper truths of existence. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be with you.
Thank you. I'd like to start off by talking about how non-duality can seem like an abstract concept to many. For those new to this understanding, how would you define non-duality in the simplest terms? And could you also share why this realization is so fundamental, especially in the context of people that are trying to seek happiness, but they're unable to find it because at the end of the day, all we want is happiness, and we're just going through different avenues to achieve that.
Yes. There's nothing abstract or complicated about non-duality. It is, of all the philosophies, it is the simplest philosophy and the easiest to understand. And non-duality states simply this, that peace and happiness are the nature of our being, and we share our being with everyone and everything. That's it. If you've understood that, you have understood the vast majority, and certainly the most important aspect of all the great religious and spiritual traditions from the last 3,000 years. Well, all the great religious and spiritual traditions can be boiled down. I'm not suggesting it's the only way to express the non-dual understanding. There are many ways it can be expressed. But one way would be simply, peace and happiness are the nature of our being, and we share our being with everyone and everything. So how can this help people who are seeking for peace and happiness? Well, it helps profoundly, because the vast majority of people are seeking peace and happiness in objective experience, by which I mean objects, substances, activities, relationships, and so on. And whilst these may, to begin with, seem to provide happiness, the happiness they provide is temporary. But nobody wants it lasts for as long as the object or the substance, the activity or the relationship lasts. But nobody seeks temporary happiness or intermittent peace. Everybody wants lasting peace, a happiness that lasts, a happiness that doesn't fluctuate with the content of experience. And so the great tradition of non-duality, in whatever religious or spiritual tradition it has been expressed, simply says peace and happiness cannot be found in the objective content of experience. If you want to find peace and happiness, lasting peace and happiness, you must look for it where it resides, namely in your own being. So, and this doesn't imply that it's not legitimate to seek an object, an activity, a relationship, and so on. These are perfectly legitimate desires, but the non-dual understanding suggests that you shouldn't seek these for the sake of finding happiness. Your desire for any of these things should come from happiness and should be a desire to express or celebrate this happiness in an activity or a relationship and so on. So it helps very profoundly. In fact, it's the answer to everybody's desire for happiness. I would suggest that everybody, almost without exception, if not without exception, who is watching this interview on YouTube or on your channel, is doing so precisely because the world has failed to provide them with the happiness that it seemed to promise. And it's as a result of being disappointed in objects, substances, activities, and relationships numerous times that we begin to intuit, maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. And the non-dual understanding says, yes, you're looking in the wrong place. Happiness is the nature of your being. You want happiness, all you need to do is go to your being. That's the first aspect of the non-dual understanding, and that relates to our inner life, our desire to be happy on the inside. Peace and happiness are the nature of your being. The second aspect, and we share our being with everyone and everything. Now, this felt sense of our shared being is the familiar experience that we all refer to as love. So normally, we think and feel that we are all separate individual beings. The non-dual understanding says, no, your thoughts are separate and individual, private. Your feelings are individual and private. Your perceptions are unique. The sensations of your hand on the chair or your feet on the floor, those are personal, private, unique. But your being, you share with everyone. It's exactly like the belief that we are separate individual beings is like believing that there are innumerable different spaces in the universe. One individual space for your kitchen, one individual space for your bedroom, one individual space for your office, an individual space for your next door neighbor. In other words, millions of individual spaces. No, there's one vast space in the universe, seemingly enclosed or contained within the four walls of each building, but not really so. It's exactly the same. Non-dual understanding suggests that there is one infinite and indivisible being, seemingly enclosed in and located in, limited to each of our bodies, but it's not really like that. Just as there is the space in the room in which you and I are now sitting, is the same space as your kitchen at home. So my being and your being and everyone's being is the same being. And this is far from being abstract and philosophical, and this felt sense of our shared being is the familiar experience that each of us know as love. In other words, the non-dual understanding says that peace and happiness are the nature of being on the inside, and love is the nature of being on the outside. Love and beauty are on the outside.
So beautifully said, and I'm really believe that the audience would resonate with this, because it's true. I mean, if you take even a second to dive within your own experiences in your life in regards to happiness, even we we tend to think happiness is a destination that I will go and maybe I will do this or do that, and then I will feel that sense of happiness within myself. But as you said, all those are temporary. It's
Yes.
never, yeah.
We can be forgiven for thinking that happiness is derived from objective experience. It's a very understandable mistake that we all make, for this reason, that deep in everybody's heart that there is this longing. Some call it the longing for peace and happiness. Others rebrand that longing the search for enlightenment. Others in turn rebranded the longing for God. But whatever it is however we name that for which we long, that there is this existential longing that lives in all of us. And in order to satisfy it, we turn our attention towards some kind of objective experience. It might be an object, a substance, or it may be something more refined, a spiritual practice, a religious prayer, some kind of objective experience. And we notice that when we acquire the object, whether it's an ice cream that you want as a 5-year-old boy, or you want to win the tournament as a 15-year-old kid, or you want your first relationship, whatever it is, what we notice is that when we get the object or the substance or the activity or the relationship, we do indeed experience happiness. Mm-hmm. And so the mind thinks, you see, the happiness was produced by acquiring the object, by having the relationship and so on. That's a misinterpretation of what's happened. What has happened is that the acquisition of the object, substance, the activity, has put the activity of seeking to an end. It has brought our seeking activity to an end, because we now have what we want. We're no longer in a state of seeking. Mm-hmm. And as the seeking mind subsides, our true nature of happiness, which was always present in the background, but which was veiled by the seeking mind, now shines. But we misattribute the experience of happiness to the object. So then when the object or the substance, the activity wears off, the mind says, but last time I had some of that, or I had this experience, or I felt happy, so I'm going to go for it again. But each time we go for it, we need a little bit more of it to produce the same, to allow the seeking to subside. And that's the way addiction builds up. So it's an understandable mistake to imagine that happiness is derived from the content of experience. But after a while, as I said earlier, after we've been disappointed sufficiently often by the world, we begin to wonder, maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. And that's where the great non-dual tradition comes in and says, yes, if you want lasting peace and happiness, look for it where it resides, in your own being, as your very own self.
And you mentioned love, so I would love to touch that topic a little bit, just because these days, especially the Gen Z population, the word love gets thrown around very easily in very basic conversations. And the understanding of love, I would like to talk about how even in our most intimate relationships, our loving relationships, we experience suffering. Could you elaborate on that? Why does that occur?
Well, first thing to say is that love is not really a relationship. It's the collapse of relationship. A relationship happens between two individuals. Love is in other words, love happens between two independent or separate individuals, between me and you. I love you. So we normally think that love is a relationship between two people. Love is the collapse of that relationship. It is the revelation that we are not two beings, we are one. So actually, love is not an experience that an individual person has.
Mm-hmm.
Love is that into which the sense of being a separate individual person dissolves. However, the mind then misappropriates the experience of love and claims it for itself. Even though the finite mind, the sense of being a separate individual is dissolved in the experience of love. When the mind reappears, it claims the experience for itself. I love you. Now, if love is indeed a property of the individual mind, and if you are the object of my love, if my love depends on you, not only on your presence, but on you behaving in a particular way, then if you disappear, or if you leave, or even if you behave in a way that I don't like, the feeling of love is going to go. So we fear losing love because we think it's a temporary state of the individual. Love is not a temporary state. Love is not, indeed, it is not a state of mind. It is the nature of our being. Shakespeare puts it so well in his sonnet, love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempest and is never shaken. It's this understanding that love is unconditional. It doesn't change when the object of our love changes or disappears. It is constant, unconditional, steady. It's not a temporary fleeting feeling, and it's not dependent on how somebody does or doesn't behave.
So beautifully put. My next question, Rupert, is that the process of self-inquiry leads one to the recognition that they are not the body, mind, or any object of experience, leaving only awareness. But still, many seekers then experience a sense of emptiness. How does one turn back and transition from this nothingness to the fullness of I am?
Okay. The mind, the finite mind that is accustomed to knowing objects, looks, so to speak, at awareness. It can't really look at awareness, but it looks at awareness, and it superimposes onto it its knowledge of objects, and it recognizes, oh, there's an absence of objects there. It's empty. And therefore the mind says it's boring. So awareness is only empty from the point of view of the object-knowing mind. In its own experience of itself, it is full. So the mind, for instance, let's say you're resting in awareness as awareness, the mind will consider that experience is boring. Why? Because the mind is superimposing a blank, empty nothingness onto the fullness of being. Let me give you an illustration. Imagine a woman has been on vacation for 3 weeks, and she comes back home, and she gets to the airport, but she's got 2 heavy cases. They're too heavy for her to get home. So she calls a local taxi driver, calls the local Uber. She books an Uber, and the Uber driver comes to pick her up and delivers her to her home. But her cases are very heavy. So the driver says, "Can I help you in with your cases?" And she says, "Yes, sure, thank you." So they go into the woman's home. The woman goes in. The Uber driver comes in carrying her 2 heavy suitcases. He puts them down in the sitting room, and she looks up and she says, "Oh my goodness, it's gone." Uber driver looks at her and says, "What do you mean?" She says, "My painting. My favorite painting.
Okay.
It's gone. It must have been stolen." The Uber driver looks back at the wall. He's puzzled by what she's saying. He looks at her again. "My favorite painting used to be there. It's gone." Again, he looks at the wall. He doesn't see the absence of a painting because he hadn't seen the painting in the first place. She sees an absence of a painting. He sees the presence of the wall. They're looking at the same thing. She considers it an absence because she's seeing it through the filter of her memory of the painting. He doesn't filter his experience through his memory. He's just looking at the fullness of the wall. There's nothing missing there. So it's exactly the same. The mind considers awareness a blank, empty nothing. There's something missing. It's not full of objects. It's not exciting. It's not fun. Well, the mind superimposes a blank, empty nothingness onto our true nature and calls it boring. Whereas in awareness's experience of itself, awareness is not comparing its experience of itself with the content of experience, thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. So in its experience of itself, it is full. Not full of objects, full of itself alone. But for the mind, awareness is empty. Mm-hmm. For awareness is full, presence, not absence.
That really, really makes sense. Yeah. I wanted to ask if the waking state is a kind of a dream within infinite consciousness. Can you dive into what exactly happens when we wake up from this dream?
Yes. The English poet William Wordsworth said, "Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting." And what he was referring to was just that when we wake up in the waking state, or when we're born into the waking state, or indeed when we wake up in the waking state in the morning, we really fall asleep to our true nature. In that sense, the waking state could be said to be a kind of waking dream. What is meant by this? Our essential self, you can call it a self, our true nature, our essence, is the fact of being, or being aware, or awareness itself. Mm-hmm. And all experience appears in awareness. It is known by awareness, and it is made of awareness. In other words, awareness or consciousness, I use the words synonymously, it is the only substance present in experience. The only substance that has ever been known is awareness, or knowing, or consciousness. And of course, it is awareness that knows that knowing, that awareness. Now, in its own experience of itself, prior to the arising of objective experience, thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perception, awareness, the only experience it has of itself is the awareness of its own being. Yeah. If it were to express that experience, it can't without the use of the finite mind. But if it were to express that experience, all awareness could say about itself is, "I am." Words, "I am" express awareness's knowledge of itself, the awareness of being. Mm. Now, awareness has the capacity to modulate itself in the form of perception. Actually, in the case of a human being, thought and perception. So the finite mind consists of the activities of thought and perception, but thought and perception are not added into awareness from the outside. It is awareness itself that assumes the form of thought and perception, in the same way that a movie is not placed onto a screen from the outside. It is the screen itself that appears as the movie, that colors itself in the form of the movie. So we could say that awareness colors itself modulates itself in the form of thought and perception, and in doing so, fragments itself. In the same way that the single screen appears as 10,000 people in a crowd in a movie, but it's the screen itself that is not really fragmenting itself, because there are no fragments there in the movie, but it appears as 10,000 things, although the screen is one thing. The screen assumes the form of the movie, assumes the appearance of 10,000 things, and in doing so, it seems to veil itself with its own activity. Mm-hmm. So when we're looking at the screen, we seem not to be seeing the screen, and we seem to be seeing 10,000 things. Well, it's exactly the same. Awareness, who we truly are, that which truly is, not just who we as individuals truly are, but the reality of all that is a single, homogeneous, unified, indivisible, infinite field. But it has the capacity to modulate itself in the form of thought and perception. And in doing so, it appears to itself as the universe. So through the activities of thought and perception, awareness veils itself with its own activity. The activities of thought and perception are its own imagination. But it simultaneously rises in the form of thought and perception and then loses itself in its own imagination. So the waking state arises within awareness, and then awareness loses itself in that state, like an actor who plays the part of a character, but he gives himself so fully to the part that he loses himself in it and seems to become the character. So it's the same thing. Awareness arises in the form of thought and perception, fragments or seem to fragment itself. The unity of its own being now appears as a multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves, and it localizes itself within its own imagination as one of those selves, or as a multiplicity of selves. And in doing so seems to become something temporary, finite, a limited person or a limited self.
No, I really relate to this, especially because as an actor myself, I've experienced being fully lost into the role. My experience with the projects that I was doing, I remember how sometimes you just give yourself and you just put so much attention into it that you just completely lose yourself in it.
Yes. William Blake said a beautiful thing. He said, eternity is in love with the productions of time. To be in love with, to be one with. Consciousness gives itself so fully to its own imagination that it holds nothing of itself back. It doesn't stand back and say, "Oh, I'm really consciousness. I'm just going to imagine the creation, the manifestation within myself." It is in love with the productions of time. It gives itself utterly, completely to its own imagination, to its own creativity. But it pays a price for doing so. In doing so, it overlooks its own nature and therefore loses touch with the peace that is its nature. And it's for that reason that in the heart of all individuals that there lives this wound in the heart of all individuals. And that wound seeks one thing alone, seeks to be returned to its source, to be divested of the limitations that the individual borrows from the content of experience, just longs to go home and to stand revealed again as the infinite.
So beautifully explained. Yeah, we long to go back to that original state. Yeah.
Every desire for happiness, every search for enlightenment, every longing for God are just different ways that the finite mind formulates this longing that the individual has to be divested of its limitations, the limitations that it borrows from the content of experience, and to stand revealed as it truly is, the infinite.
Definitely. I want to bring up this quote of Meister Eckhart. The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. Can you talk about how this statement aligns with the non-dual understanding that awareness is not separate from what it perceives?
Okay. Can we go back to the analogy of the actor to explain this? Beautiful, beautiful statement from Meister Eckhart. Meister Eckhart was one of the great non-dual masters from in the Western tradition, mystical Christian tradition. Let's take the analogy of an actor. Take an actor, John Smith, who plays the part of King Lear. So John Smith goes to his theatre. King Lear is a suit of clothes that John Smith puts on, and a series of lines and actions. Mm-hmm. So John Smith, before he goes to the theatre, he knows himself as John Smith. He goes to the theatre, he puts on puts on the suit of clothes, and he adopts a series of lines and activities and relationships. And he seems, as a result, to become King Lear. Not really King Lear, he's always only John Smith, but he now seems to be the person, King Lear. In this analogy, John Smith represents awareness, and King Lear represents the finite mind. So awareness has clothed itself in thoughts and perceptions and seems to have become a finite mind. John Smith has clothed himself in King Lear's thoughts and feelings and actions and seems to have become the King of England. Yeah. Now, when King Lear, King Lear knows himself, or seems to know himself, as King Lear. John Smith knows himself as John Smith. Yeah. Now, if King Lear wants to know himself, wants to know who he is, he has to turn his attention away from everything that is not essential to him. He's obviously not his thoughts, because his thoughts are continually coming and going. He's obviously not his emotions, because his emotions are continually changing. He's obviously not his sensations and perceptions. So King Lear begins to trace his way back through the layers of his experience, discarding everything that is not essential to him, because only that which is essential to him qualifies as his self, his essential self. But King Lear traces his way back through the layers of his experience, and at some stage there is this recognition, I am John Smith. Mm-hmm. So King Lear knows himself through John Smith. The self of King Lear is John Smith. And it's not King Lear that has the experience of being John Smith. Mm-hmm. Only John Smith has the experience of being John Smith.
Yes.
So King Lear knows himself as John Smith through John Smith. Now, in the opposite direction, how does in what way does John Smith know that he is the self of King Lear? It's in exactly the same way. When King Lear is on stage acting, John Smith knows himself as the very being of King Lear, because John Smith is all there is to King Lear. Yeah. So it's through the knowledge, I am John Smith, is both John Smith's knowledge of himself and King Lear's knowledge of himself. It's the same experience. The only identity, the only I that is there is the I of John Smith, the only identity. the only self, if we can call it a self. So it's exactly the same. If we trace our way back through the layers of our experience to and go all the way back, discarding everything that is not essential to us, we arrive simply at being, or being aware, or pure awareness itself. In religious terms, God's being. So we know ourself as God's being. The being in us is God's being. The self in us is the only self there is, the being, infinite being, God's being. It is the only self, if we can call it a self, or being there is. So the self that stands at the heart of the individual, and the self, we can call it a self that awareness is, that the being that stands at the heart of the individual, and the being that is the nature of awareness, that they're the same being. The space in this room, which seems to be a temporary, finite, limited space, is the same space as the vast, unlimited space of the universe. If the space in this room were to give itself a name, it would call itself I. The space of the universe were to give itself a name, it would call itself I. Mm-hmm. That's the same I. If King Lear were to give himself a name, he'd call himself I. If John Smith were to give himself a name, he'd call himself I. But those are not two different I's. There's not one being for John Smith and another being for King Lear. Yeah. One I for John Smith and another I for King Lear. It's the same I. So the I that King Lear knows himself to be, and the I that John Smith knows himself to be, are the same I. If God, whatever you conceive God to be, the absolute, the ultimate, if God were to say something true about itself, the first thing it would say, and in fact the only thing it could say accurately, is I am. I am represents infinite awareness's knowledge of itself, the knowing of being, the awareness of being. We express that by saying I am. But if God were able, or you don't like the word God, if infinite being were able to say something about itself, it would just say I am. Now, what about the individual? If I asked you to say something, what is your most fundamental experience? Before you experience a thought or a feeling or a sensation or a perception, what is your fundamental experience of yourself? It's the experience of being, which, if you were to express it in words, you would express it by saying, I am. Now, the experience to which you refer when you say I am, and the experience to which God or infinite being would refer if it were able to say I am, is the same experience. In other words, the I am, or the experience to which we refer when we say I am, is God's being shining in us as our very own being. That's what Meister Eckhart meant.
So beautiful. So beautiful. Truly, truly. It just, like, even while you say it, it just, the experience of I am just knows that that's the truth.
Yes. The awareness of being, which we express with the words I am, is the only experience that is absolutely true. And the reason for that is that it's the only experience we have that is not mediated through the finite mind. For instance, your experience of the world is mediated through your finite mind, through perception, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. So you can't be sure, we can't be sure, that what we're seeing out there as the world is really the world as it is in itself, because we're seeing it through the lens of sense perception. In fact, we can be absolutely certain that the reality of the world is not how it appears to be, because our sense perceptions render the world in a way that is consistent with their own limitations. Just like when you look at white snow through orange tinted glasses, you see orange snow. So this is true of all experience is mediated through the finite mind, and as a result shares its limitations. So all knowledge and experience is relative to the finite mind through which it is known. The only experience there is that is not mediated through the finite mind is the knowing of being, the awareness of being. And for that reason, I am is said to be the highest truth, the highest, the absolute truth. Can I take this further?
Please.
The knowledge I am is even higher than the knowledge God is. For this reason, that God would never say of itself, God is. God would say of itself, I am. It's only we, the finite mind, that says God is, like we say the tree is, or the mountain is, or the sky is, and God is. When we say God is, we stand apart from God as a temporary finite mind, and we say God is.
Mm-hmm.
God is the object of our experience. But in God's infinite being, there's no room for anything other than itself. In infinite being, there's no room for a finite object or a finite self. But ultimately, the knowledge God is false. It's blasphemy. Because in order to say God is, we must set ourselves up as a being apart from God. And by doing so, we deny God's infinite being. It's truer to say I am. Why? Because I am expresses God's experience of itself. And if God is the reality, if God is the religious name for the totality, the absolute, the reality, then only its knowledge of itself can be true knowledge. Therefore, I am is the highest expression of truth in the English language. And it's for this reason that Meister Eckhart prayed to God to rid him of God. And that was considered blasphemy at the time, but it wasn't blasphemy. He realized in that considering God to be God, he was setting himself up as a being apart from God's being, and that is blasphemy. But he realized that to say God is denying God's infinite being, is setting himself up as a being apart from God's being. He realized that was blasphemy. He realized this was the last barrier between dissolving completely into God's being. And so he prayed to God to take God away from him so that he could stand revealed as God's being. Not knowing God's being, but being God's being. And the Buddhists say this in their own way. If you meet the Buddha on the path, kill him. It's the same understanding.
And I'd even like to take this a little bit further, and more so for the people that are watching this video, and just from my personal experience, a lot of my friends that I've kind of told about my journey, they all assume, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this might have that question that, oh, so what if I come to this realization of that of being? What happens after that? And I try to explain to them as much as what I know, but if you could shed a little bit of light on why you should not expect, but yeah, please just take, yeah.
Two things happen. Mm-hmm. One is that the existential longing and fear, that are the two fundamental emotions that we have. A sense of lack or desire, and the fear of disappearance, the fear of death. Really, one might say that everything we do as a person we do for the sole purpose of avoiding the discomfort of desire or lack and the fear of death. And this recognition of the nature of our being puts an end to that existential longing and the fear of death.
Mhm.
That's one thing that it does. And the second thing is that sense perception, occasionally suddenly, but usually gradually, it becomes progressively transparent to its reality. It loses its veiling power. Our sense perceptions used to tell us that the earth was flat. We looked more closely and we realized it was wrong. Sense perception used to tell us that the sun traveled around the earth. We looked more closely and we found that it was wrong. Sense perception now tells most people that reality consists of a multiplicity and diversity of material things.
Yeah.
And the inevitable consequence of that belief is sorrow on the inside and conflict on the outside. So as the evidence of the persuasive power of sense perception is eroded, we see through the illusion that our senses present us with. Our senses present us with the illusion of multiplicity and the appearance of multiplicity and diversity. We see, as it were, through that. I don't mean literally through it. We see through it. Our understanding overrides the apparent evidence of sense perception. And we see, we understand, we feel the unity of being that lies behind the multiplicity and diversity of appearances. And that's the experience of love. So this understanding has a very profound effect on our interior life, our emotional, intellectual, interior life, and also our activities and relationships in the world. In terms of activities, our faculties of action that were previously used in the service of the ego, the temporary, finite, separate self, those faculties remain. We continue to have our faculties, whatever they are for each of us,
Yeah.
but they are now used in the service of love and understanding, whereas previously they were used in the service of the fears, the desires, the demands, the neuroses of the apparently separate self.
Beautifully said. I really relate to that. Even for me personally, when I see that, even though your daily situations, your daily reactions are still there, but I see that that being that I am, that's the same being that's within someone.
And that informs the way you relate, the way you react, the way you respond, the way you think, the way you feel. It informs your relationships. It transforms your entire life from the inside. And that transformation is gradual and never-ending.
Gradual and never-ending. I wanted to talk about suffering. In non-duality, suffering is often said to be an illusion because it belongs to the mind-body, not to infinite awareness. Is suffering simply a case of mistaken identity? And
Yes, I understand, of course, why it is said that suffering is an illusion. What is really meant is that the separate self on whose behalf our suffering arises is itself illusory. And therefore, if the self on whose behalf our suffering arises is illusory, then its suffering must be equally illusory. King Lear, John Smith, when he lives at home in his apartment, he's perfectly happy. He goes to the theatre, dresses up as King Lear. He acts. As soon as he becomes King Lear, he starts suffering. Well, King Lear is an illusion. There's no real character called King Lear, and his suffering is only as good as the person he seems to be. So in that sense, we can say that King Lear's suffering is an illusion. Mm-hmm. However, I'm reluctant to use, and of course I understand that. But I'm reluctant to use that phrase because but by definition, we feel that our suffering is real. If we didn't feel that our suffering was real, if we thought it was a play or a game, we would be play acting, like John Smith play acting. Sure. John Smith is not really suffering. Yeah. But if we knew that we weren't really suffering, that our suffering was an illusion, then we wouldn't be suffering.
We wouldn't be. Yeah.
So we cannot say, it is disingenuous to be suffering and to say, oh, but I know my suffering's an illusion. If we are doing this, we are simply washing a veneer of non-duality over the truth of our emotions, which is, I am suffering. And at this moment of suffering, I believe I am a temporary finite self, and it is on behalf of that temporary finite self that I am suffering. It's better to be honest about that, because then there's something we can do about it, rather than to pretend I'm suffering, but I know it's an illusion. So I would never say to someone who is suffering, or your suffering is an illusion. I would say, instead of getting lost in your anxiety or your jealousy or your despair, explore who it is. When you say, I am sad, don't explore the sadness, explore the I. When you say, I am lonely, don't explore the loneliness. Who is lonely? When you say, I am lonely, who is that one? Or I am jealous, or I am anxious. Explore that, because then there's something there's something to do then. There's something to explore.
Yes.
And
yes.
It's like saying if somebody in King Lear's world, if Cordelia, his daughter, says to him, "Oh, King Lear, your suffering is an illusion," he's going to say, "No, my suffering is real." But if Cordelia says to him, "Father, don't be so immersed in your sorrow. Just investigate who are you really? You're obviously not your thoughts. You're obviously not your feeling." Cordelia is teaching King Lear self-inquiry. King Lear begins to trace his way back through his experience, through the layers of his experience. And then at some point there is this recognition, I'm John Smith. And at that moment, his innate peace comes back. His suffering evaporates because he has recognized, I'm not really King Lear. I'm not really a temporary finite self. I am this inherently peaceful John Smith, the presence of awareness. So for that reason, I tend not to tell people that their suffering is illusory.
No, I think I really do agree with you on that front. And it is true. If by saying your suffering is illusory, you are washing yourself with a little bit of that non-duality.
Yes. It's the ego or apparently separate self is always trying to avoid the discomfort of suffering. And by washing a veneer of non-duality over its suffering is just a slightly more refined way of avoiding suffering. It does not uproot the suffering, and sooner or later this veneer will crack and we'll just have to face our suffering.
How can one move beyond intellectual understanding to a direct experiential realization? Since non-dual awareness is not an object that can be grasped conceptually, according to you, what are the most effective ways to shift from thinking about it to directly knowing it?
Well, you could ask yourself a question such as, what element of my experience cannot be removed from me? Let's do it now. Your thoughts are continually appearing to you and vanishing. Even as we've been talking, we both had numerous thoughts. If any particular thought was essential to us, then every time a thought disappeared, we'd feel, oh, a little bit of me has disappeared. But we don't feel that. We feel that the whole of me remains behind. The thoughts are just coming and going all the time. The thoughts obviously cannot be myself, because whatever myself is, I'm always myself.
Yeah.
And we're ourself in the waking state, we're ourself in the dream state, we're ourself in deep sleep. We've been ourself all our life. So whatever ourself is must be that we always are. Yeah. That doesn't come and go. That cannot be taken away. You know you're not your sweater.
No.
Because you take your sweater off.
Exactly. Just like thoughts, they do come and go.
They come and go. Your thoughts are like your sweater. Your feelings are like your shoes. You're not always sad, but you are always yourself. You're not always lonely, but you are always yourself. So in this way, and we do this experientially. It's not, we're formulating now, but you can actually go into yourself and ask, okay, my thoughts are coming and going. I'm obviously not my thoughts. My feelings are coming and going. I'm obviously not my feelings. The sensations of my feet on the floor or the temperature of the air on my skin, these sensations are not always present. No sensation is always present. So I cannot be a sensation. No perception is present. So when you remove all of these, it's like asking, what is the nature of the space in this room? We might think to begin with that the space in this room is square and high and light and full of objects and old and pale yellow. But none of those are qualities that are essential to the space. How are we going to find out what is essential to the space? Well, let's take out everything that's not essential. Let's take out the chairs and the tables and the mics and the lights and the curtains and the carpets. And let's take down the walls, because the walls are not. What remains? Only that. Can you take the space away from this? No. So you go on. You take away experientially, not just thinking about you.
Yeah.
You take away your thoughts. It's like undressing. You take off everything that can be taken off. You remove you don't have to actually get rid of any experience. You just have to perform the experiment, not to think about the experiment, but to do the experiment. If I take off my thoughts, take off my feelings, take off my perceptions, take off my activities, take off my relationships, what's left?
That space.
Just naked being.
Naked being.
And that's, obviously we're describing it in rational terms, but I hope, well, I can see you were following. I hope your listeners were either following along with us or in their own time. You can do this experiment for yourself, and it's practical, it's experiential, and it doesn't take 30 years. It takes 3 minutes. You can go directly, and this is why this approach is sometimes called the direct approach, because we just go directly. King Lear, sorry, I'm completely mixing my metaphors.
No worries.
King Lear doesn't start practicing different practices. He could do that, and it's perfectly legitimate to do that. I don't mean to imply that it's not legitimate to do other practices, but the quickest, the easiest, the fastest way is for King Lear just to go all the way straight back to John Smith. I'm obviously not my relationship with my daughters. I'm obviously not the King of England. I'm obviously not my thought. Go back and back and back. Oh, I am John Smith. Now, that recognition, I am pure being, pure aware being. That's what's referred to in the tradition as a glimpse of one's true nature. the recognition of one's true nature, an awakening experience, because we recognize what we are essentially. Now, in almost all cases, not all cases, there are exceptions, but the exceptions are few and far between. In almost all cases, this recognition, this glimpse, is not sufficient to put an end to the old habit of identifying oneself with the content of experience. There is this momentary glimpse. In fact, the glimpse of our true nature is timeless, because it doesn't take place in the mind, it takes place. So it's actually timeless. But this, let's call it, as a concession to time, let's call it a momentary glimpse of our true nature, is in most cases eclipsed again by the content of our experience. We feel the pull of experience, and we lose ourselves in our thoughts and feelings again. So then we have to do the experiment again, and not mechanically. You don't just mechanically ask yourself the same question, who am I, or what is it that cannot be removed from me? You might formulate the question in a new way. What is it that is always with me? You have to go there out of interest and love, not out of mechanical repetition. So you lose yourself in the content of experience again, and as a result, you start suffering. And you know now, if you want relief from your suffering, you know where to go. So you begin to trace your way back to your true nature. And again, you have you walk yourself. You take yourself by the hand. You walk yourself home again. You go back to your true nature. You taste, or you glimpse, you recognize your true nature. But again, because you've been lost in your experience for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, this habit is so strong, so you get pulled down. So to begin with, there's this back and forth. We have to, you have to row against the tide. You have to row upstream to go back to your true nature. Against the flow of the river is always taking you back out. The river is carrying you back out. So you have to, it feels like going against the tide to begin with. But after a while, every time you go back to your true nature and rest there, even briefly, you weaken the power that objective experience has over you. You weaken the pull of objective experience, little by little by little. So next time it's a little bit easier. The tide is not flowing so strongly against you, and you come back to your true nature, and you abide there for longer. And you notice after a while that fewer and fewer events in the world have the power to take you away from yourself. And this is referred to sometimes in the tradition as being established in your true nature. So there's one thing is to have a glimpse of your true nature, a taste, a recognition. For most people, there are a series of glimpses, series of recognitions. With each recognition, the power that objective experience has over us, the ability of objective experience to take us away from ourselves weakens. And then we begin to notice that our true self, being or being aware, is not just a place in ourself that we visit from time to time.
No.
Not like a holiday cottage that you go to at the weekend and then come back to the city to work. It's you move in. You begin to live there as that. It becomes to begin with, it was an extraordinary experience. Extraordinary because previously you were completely immersed or lost in the content of your experience, and now you have this taste of your being and its innate peace and quiet joy and freedom. It's an extraordinary experience. But now the experience begins to become normal. It's where you live. It's who you are. You begin to you move into your cottage. You move out of your apartment in the city. You move into your cottage. You start to work from home. You don't leave anymore. You stay there.
Stay there.
And if occasionally something that happens in the world that takes you away from your being, it doesn't last for long. You don't get lost in your feelings for 3 weeks. It's 3 minutes maximum. And there are fewer and fewer of such experiences that retain the power to take you away. You begin to feel that I'm home, I'm at peace, and this peace is not dependent on what does or does not take place in the world or in your body. It's the peace that passeth understanding. It's the peace that is not derived from the content of experience. It is the peace that is the nature of your being.
Rupert, thank you so much. Especially, I wouldn't call this a meditation, but just this guided experience that you gave. I truly hope that the audience that are watching are able to follow through with this. And this was truly an insightful and beautiful conversation that I was able to have with you, and honored to have with you.
Beautiful. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you. Thank you for your beautiful, sincere question.
Thank you.